My mother-in-law sold my childhood home behind my back. Let me say that again. The house where I took my first steps. Where my father carved our initials into the porch. Where my mother's laughter still lived in the walls. Gone. Sold. Without a single word to me. I didn't even find out from her. I found out when a stranger knocked on my door and asked, "Excuse me, are you the daughter of the previous owner? We just bought this place?" I froze. It felt like the world went silent. The man's voice faded. His words turned to static. My heartbeat was the only sound in the room. A heavy, slow, impossible sound. And that's how it started. That was the day I learned how betrayal can arrive looking polite, wearing a kind smile and carrying a house deed. I'm glad you're here, because I need to tell this right. Not to get sympathy, but because when someone you trust plays with your past, it changes something deep inside you. It makes you question what family really means, so sit with me for a few minutes. Let me take you back to the beginning. Before the for sale sign, before the lies, before I learned what kind of woman my husband's mother really was. The house sat at the edge of a quiet street in Charleston, a small, sun-warmed home with white shutters and a porch that wrapped around like a hug. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. It had survived storms, heartbreak, birthdays, and funerals. It was the kind of place that held memories in its paint. After my parents passed, I couldn't bring myself to sell it. I rented it out for a few years just to keep the lights on. When my husband and I moved back to South Carolina, I decided it was time to come home for good. My husband, Daniel, was steady, a quiet kind of man, the sort who fixed things before you even noticed they were broken. And his mother, Evelyn, well, Evelyn was the opposite. She was the kind of woman who could turn a compliment into a command and make you thank her for it. When I told her we were moving into my old family home, she smiled too tightly and said, "Oh, that's lovely, dear. I hope you don't mind all the old memories hanging around?" I laughed it off at the time. I should have known that was her way of saying she already didn't approve. Still, I tried. I wanted to believe that one day she'd see me as more than just the woman who married her son. So I let her help redecorate the living room. I let her plant flowers out front. I even let her have a key. Because family's family, right? For a while, everything seemed fine. We had Sunday dinners, birthdays, the usual family chatter. She'd bring over pies and advice I didn't ask for. And I told myself she meant well. But I remember one evening, early spring, when she stood on that porch, staring at the yard with this look I couldn't name, something between pity and ownership. She said, "You know, this place must be worth a good deal now. The land alone." I smiled, said something polite, and changed the subject. But her words stuck to me like a splinter under the skin. Weeks turned into months. I got busy with work. Daniel got busier too. And Evelyn started showing up more and more, sometimes when I wasn't even home. I'd come back to find things slightly moved. The mail sorted, the kitchen rearranged, curtains tied differently, little things. But it felt invasive. When I asked Daniel about it, he brushed it off. "She's just trying to help." He's always said that. That was the rhythm of our life then. Me trying to settle in, her slowly settling over. Looking back, I think she was testing how far she could go before I noticed. And I let her, because I wanted peace, until peace became silence. And silence became permission. If I'd known then what she was planning, I would have changed the locks. I would have checked the mail more closely. I would have asked more questions about those bank papers Daniel kept tucked in his drawer. But I didn't. Because when you love someone, you assume they'd never let someone else hurt you. You assume they'd protect what you love. And that assumption, that trust, is what she sold, long before she sold my house. So yes, my mother-in-law sold my childhood home behind my back. But that's just the headline. The real story, the one that nearly broke me, is how she made me believe it was all my fault. And I'll tell you how. She smiled through the lies. How Daniel chose silence over truth. And how I finally learned that sometimes you don't lose a home. It gets stolen from under your love. That's where it begins. And trust me, it only gets worse from here. Before everything broke, life was simple. Or at least, it looked that way from the outside. We were living what I thought was a quiet, decent life. The kind of life where the biggest problem was deciding what to cook for Sunday dinner, or who was going to mow the lawn first. I worked as a school counselor. My days were filled with small voices, tiny heartbreaks, and the occasional smile when a child finally opened up about something they'd been carrying. Daniel worked in real estate. He was good at it, too. Calm, methodical, persuasive when he needed to be. People trusted him easily. Maybe that's what made what happened later so hard to believe. Our home, my parents' home, was slowly coming back to life. When we first moved in, it smelled like dust and nostalgia. I spent weekends cleaning the corners, polishing the old banister, repainting the kitchen the same soft yellow my mother once loved. Daniel humored me when I said I wanted to keep the creaky floors. "It's character," I told him. He smiled and said, "If it makes you happy, it stays." And for a while, it really did make me happy. I'd stand in that kitchen in the morning light, coffee in hand, feeling like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I was keeping a promise to my parents, to protect what they'd built. But then there was Evelyn. She lived 20 minutes away, which in her mind meant she had a right to show up any time she wanted. At first it was helpful. She'd bring casseroles, drop off groceries, make conversation. She had this way of talking that felt like advice wrapped in judgment. "I just want to help, dear," she'd say, her eyes flicking toward the curtains or the furniture as if silently rearranging it in her mind. She never liked how I left my parents' old photographs up. "Doesn't it feel heavy?" she asked one day. "Looking at the past all the time?" I smiled and said, "It feels like home." She didn't respond, just pressed her lips together, a small movement that said more than words ever could. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter, that she was just being her, a woman who needed to feel useful, involved, needed. But Evelyn didn't just help. She inserted herself. She'd bring new curtains as a gift, replace the doormat, move the flower pots. Always smiling, always calling me sweetheart. And I, foolishly, wanted her approval. I grew up believing that family, especially mothers, meant safety. My own mother used to say, "Don't ever let pride get in the way of peace." So when Evelyn made me feel small, I stayed polite. When she corrected me in front of Daniel, I swallowed my irritation. When she started calling our house, I laughed it off. One night after she left, I said to Daniel, "Do you ever feel like your mom doesn't think this house is mine?" He was half asleep on the couch, eyes still on the TV. He said, "She just cares too much, that's all. Don't take it personally." I remember staring at him, that calm face, the easy way he dismissed it, and feeling something twist inside me. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was more like a warning bell. Soft, distant, but impossible to unhear. Still, life went on. Evelyn started dropping by while I was at work. She had the spare key, after all. At first, I thought she was just checking on things. Then I noticed the subtle changes. My mother's old vase missing from the mantel, a new rug I didn't buy, a stack of letters I never saw in the mail. I'd ask Daniel about them and he'd shrug. "Maybe she's tidying up," he said. That became his favorite phrase. "She's just tidying up." I told myself to breathe, to let it go. It wasn't worth a fight, but every little tidy-up felt like a small theft. Not of things, but of memories, of the home that was once mine, being quietly rewritten by someone who had never lived a single day in it. Sundays were the worst. Evelyn insisted we eat dinner together every week. She'd cook, we'd bring dessert, and somehow, the evening always ended with her telling a story that made Daniel the hero and me the student. Her stories were full of lessons, for me, of course, about loyalty, gratitude, obedience. She'd say, "A good wife knows when to yield." I'd smile, nod, and sip my tea, counting down the minutes until we could leave. But one Sunday, her tone shifted. She started talking about property, about how Daniel was smart with investments, and how old homes can be a burden if you hold on too long. I felt her eyes on me when she said it, steady, deliberate. I laughed nervously. "Some things aren't meant to be sold," I said. And she smiled. That small, polite, poisonous smile. "Well," she said, "everything has a price, dear. Even memories. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying her words. Daniel slept soundly beside me like he didn't have a care in the world. And I wondered, if it ever came to it, would he choose me? It was an awful thought, and I hated myself for having it. But it lingered, like a whisper I couldn't shut out. In the morning, I made coffee, sat at the table, and told myself I was being paranoid, that Evelyn's words didn't mean anything, that no one could take something from me without my knowing. But deep down, I felt it, that quiet sense of something slipping away. Something I couldn't quite name yet. And that's how it always begins, isn't it? Not with an explosion, but with a whisper. Not with a thief in the night, but a hand that learns your habits, your blind spots, your trust. I didn't know it yet, but the woman I was trying so hard to please was already planning my undoing. And the man I loved most in the world, the one person who should have been my shield, was already holding the door open for her. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. I was halfway through a counseling session at school when my phone buzzed. Normally, I wouldn't have checked it, but I recognized the number. It was from the bank. The woman on the other end sounded cheerful, too cheerful for what she was about to say. Mrs. Harris? We just wanted to confirm the transfer you requested for the property at 182 Maple Lane. I froze. That was my address. My parents' address. I'm sorry, I said. There must be a mistake. She double-checked her screen, calm as ever. It's listed under Daniel and Evelyn Harris. Joint authorization. The words hit me like ice water. Joint authorization. Daniels and Evelyn. Before I could even think, I said, I didn't authorize anything. The woman's confused. Oh, I see. Well, maybe your husband did. It looks like everything's already cleared, so it should finalize this week. I thanked her, hung up, and just sat there. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I told myself I misheard. That it was another property. Daniel worked in real estate after all. But the way she said 182 Maple Lane left no room for doubt. When I finally stood up, my hands were trembling. That night, I waited for Daniel to come home. He was late, again. Lately, he'd been working longer hours, or so he said. When he walked in, he looked surprised to see me sitting in the living room with the lights off. Everything okay? He asked. I could barely get the words out. Did you sell the house? He blinked, caught off guard. What? No. Why would you even… I interrupted him. The bank called. They said something about a transfer. Our address. For a second, just 1 second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt? Fear? Then it was gone, replaced with confusion. Oh, he said slowly. That must be some mix-up. Maybe Mom's refinancing something? You know how she handles her own investments. His voice was steady, but it didn't sound right. Daniel had always been calm, but calmness can hide a lot of sins. I wanted to believe him. God knows I did. So I nodded, even as my chest burned. He kissed my forehead, said he'd take care of it in the morning, and went upstairs. I stayed on the couch for another hour, staring at the dark window, seeing my own reflection, tired, uncertain, small. The next few days passed in a fog. Daniel didn't bring it up again, and I didn't ask. But little things started to shift. Evelyn dropped by more often, moving through the house like she owned it. One day she asked me casually if I'd ever thought about downsizing. You and Daniel are still young, she said. You could make a fresh start. Let go of all this. Old weight, I smiled tightly. This house isn't weight, I said. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Of course not, dear. I began noticing whispers between them, glances, unfinished sentences. Sometimes I'd walk into a room and both of them would stop talking mid-sentence, their expressions smoothing too quickly. It was small things at first. An envelope I wasn't supposed to see. A closed laptop screen when I walked in. A call cut short as soon as I said, hello. I tried to rationalize every sign. Because when you love someone, truly love them, your first instinct isn't to accuse. It's to explain away. One night, while Daniel showered, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I told myself not to look. I told myself it was a test of trust. But something deep inside whispered, you already failed that test. He did first. The message preview was from Evelyn. Everything's ready. Just need her signature. My stomach dropped. I opened the thread. There were dozens of messages, conversations about documents, timelines, and keeping her calm. And one that made my skin crawl. She won't even know until it's done. My breath caught. I scrolled faster, half panicked, half paralyzed. Then I heard the shower stop. I dropped the phone, stepped away, and tried to look normal. He came out smiling, towel around his neck. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded, smiling back, my heart thudding in my chest. "Fine," I said. Everything's fine, but everything was not fine. That night I barely slept. I replayed the messages over and over, hearing the echo of Evelyn's words. Everything's ready for what? The next morning, I drove to the bank before work. The woman I'd spoken to earlier wasn't there, but another representative was kind enough to print out what she could. Sure enough, there was paperwork, a property sale, pending completion. But my signature line was blank. Yet the form had already been submitted. How can it go through if I didn't sign? I asked. The man shrugged apologetically. Sometimes if there's joint ownership and both parties are on the title, one signature can proceed temporarily until verification. My throat went dry. Joint ownership. That's when it hit me. Daniel must have changed the deed. And I had signed something months ago without reading every line. It was one of those moments that makes you hate yourself. Not because you were tricked, but because you trusted. I drove home shaking. Evelyn's car was already in the driveway. When I walked in, she was standing in the kitchen, rearranging my spice rack like she owned the place. "Oh, there you are," she said cheerfully. "I was just making some space for new things." I really looked at her. That polished calmness. That gentle tone that somehow always managed to sound like ownership. I wanted to scream, to ask her what she thought she was doing. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the knowledge that she was 10 steps ahead of me. So instead, I smiled and said, "Of course. Make all the space you need," she smiled back, too easily. That's when I knew. She wasn't just rearranging my spices. She was rearranging my life. That evening, Daniel told me he had to travel for a few days for work. No details. No itinerary. Just a bag by the door and a kiss on the cheek that felt rehearsed. After he left, the house felt different. Colder. Like it was already slipping from my hands. I walked through each room. The kitchen, the living room, my parents' old bedroom, touching the walls, whispering apologies to ghosts that couldn't answer. I had a sick feeling that when Daniel came back, nothing would be the same. And I was right. Because what I discovered next, what was hidden in that stack of old mail Evelyn tidied up, would shatter every last piece of the life I thought I knew. I found the proof by accident. That's what still haunts me. It wasn't some clever investigation or a dramatic confrontation. It was a stack of old mail Evelyn had tidied up and left on the hallway console. A thin white envelope sat on top. My name printed neatly. The kind of letter you might overlook if you weren't already looking for ghosts. It was from the county records office. Curiosity won. I opened it. Inside were the finalized papers for the sale of property at 182 Maple Lane, the house I was still living in. My eyes blurred before I reached the bottom of the page. The sale had been completed. The signatures, Daniel's and mine, both there, except mine wasn't mine. I stared at the handwriting, my own name written in someone else's slanted loops. A near-perfect imitation. My knees went weak. For a long moment, I couldn't even process what I was seeing. I sat on the stairs, that paper trembling in my hands, feeling my pulse in my temples. There was no misunderstanding now. No refinancing, no mix-up. They'd forged my name. They'd sold my parents' home right out from under me. I thought of my father sanding the banister when I was 12. My mother hanging curtains that smelled like lavender. The birthdays, the storms, the laughter echoing through these same walls. And now gone. Signed away like it meant nothing. The rage came later. First came disbelief. Cold, quiet disbelief. I walked around the house in a daze, clutching that letter. Every room whispering they did this to you. Daniel had left 3 days ago for his so-called work trip. Evelyn was due to stop by in the afternoon to check on things. That gave me just enough time to search. I don't even know what I was looking for at first. Maybe anything that would make this make sense. But the deeper I dug, the more lies I uncovered. At the back of Daniel's office drawer, beneath a pile of invoices, I found another envelope. Heavier, yellowed from handling. Inside were copies of the original deed transfer papers. My parents had listed me as the sole heir. Daniel's name wasn't there until a newer page appeared stapled behind it. That version listed Daniel and Evelyn Harris as co-owners. In small print, near the bottom was my own signature again. Forged. I felt sick. I sat on the edge of his desk, clutching the paper, breathing like someone learning how again. Then I noticed something else. Tucked behind those documents was a folded letter, older, creased. The handwriting was unmistakably Evelyn's. "Daniel, we have to move quickly. She'll never agree if we tell her outright. Once the papers are through, we can handle the fallout. Trust me. This is for the best. For both of us." My heart stopped. For the best. For both of them. The meaning sank in slowly, like poison. Evelyn hadn't manipulated Daniel. They'd done this together. My husband and his mother had sold my childhood home, not for survival, not by accident, but because they could. Because they decided my attachment was inconvenient. Because they saw opportunity where I saw memory. I sat there for what felt like hours. Every sound in the house felt wrong now. The creak of the floor, the hum of the fridge, the faint ticking of the clock. It all felt foreign, like the house had already decided I didn't belong. I thought about confronting Evelyn that day, screaming, throwing every paper in her face. But the truth is, I was scared. Not of her exactly, but of what I might do once I started talking. Because I wasn't just hurt. I was humiliated. And humiliation burns hotter than anger. So when she arrived, calm as ever, carrying her little tote bag of errands, I played dumb. She smiled that familiar smile, looked around and said, "You should start thinking about packing soon, dear. It'll make things easier when the paperwork clears." That word, paperwork, almost made me laugh. I could feel my pulse rising, the words fighting to get out. But I stayed quiet. For now. Evelyn moved around like a queen inspecting her castle. At one point, she paused at the family photo wall, the one my parents started years ago. She ran her fingers over a picture of my wedding day and said, "You've had a good run here." That was the moment something inside me broke and reformed into something colder. I realized there was no appealing to her heart, no begging for reason. Evelyn didn't believe she was stealing from me. She believed she was correcting a mistake. After she left, I went straight to my parents' old bedroom, my sanctuary. There, in the cedar chest at the foot of the bed, I kept the few things that truly mattered: my mother's diary, my father's watch, and a little velvet box that held the deed they'd once given me. I opened the box, empty. That's when the tears came. The ugly, uncontrollable kind that leave you gasping. I sank to the floor, clutching the chest, whispering to the ghosts of my parents that I was sorry. Sorry for not protecting their home. Sorry for loving a man who didn't value what they built. It wasn't just the house they'd taken. It was the last piece of my parents I still had. That night, I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My house felt hostile, like it knew it was no longer mine. Every creak sounded like footsteps. Every silence sounded like goodbye. At some point, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, red-eyed and shaking. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. That's when I knew something had to change. I couldn't just sit there waiting for my life to be erased. The next morning, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, papers spread before me. The forged documents, the letter, the bank statement. And for the first time in weeks, my mind felt clear. They thought they'd fooled me. They thought I'd crumble quietly. But I wasn't raised that way. My parents taught me to fight for what mattered, so I made a promise. Not out loud, but deep in my chest. I would not let them take this without a fight, even if it meant burning every bridge in my family, even if it meant becoming someone I barely recognized. I gathered every document, every signature, every text I could find. I called the bank again, asked discreet questions, learned about the transaction's timeline. I learned that the new buyer was a company Evelyn had partial ownership in. She hadn't sold the house to a stranger. She'd sold it to herself. That realization almost made me laugh. A bitter, hollow laugh that scared me with how cold it sounded. Because in that moment, I wasn't broken anymore. I was focused, sharp, and maybe for the first time, dangerous. The time for heartbreak had passed. Now came the time for calculation, and I knew exactly where to start. The morning after I found the forged papers, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just sat at the table staring at my coffee until it went cold. Something inside me had gone still, not empty, but focused, like the ocean right before a storm. I realized that if I wanted justice, I couldn't act like a wounded woman. I had to think like them, calm, strategic, no emotion, no weakness. So I began making a plan. I started with information. Every lie they'd told me left a paper trail somewhere. Emails, transactions, text messages, small cracks waiting to be pried open. I called an old friend from college, Melissa, who worked in real estate law. We hadn't spoken in years, but when she heard the tremor in my voice, she didn't hesitate. "Send me everything you've got," she said. "Every document, every note. And don't confront them until we know what we're dealing with." Her calm confidence steadied me. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't drowning alone. For 3 days, I collected evidence. I scanned the letters, photographed the forged signature, pulled bank records. At night, I'd sit in the dim glow of my laptop, scrolling through messages between Daniel and Evelyn, messages I'd once ignored because I trusted them. Now, every word looked like a confession. "Mom, she's getting suspicious. Just keep her calm until closing. I'll handle the deed paperwork." Handle. That word again. The casual cruelty of it made my stomach turn. While I worked, I thought about Daniel. About the man I'd loved for 10 years. How many dinners had he sat across from me, smiling, knowing he was erasing my past behind my back? Did he ever feel guilty? Did he ever look at me and see the woman whose heart he was breaking? I tried to find one memory untouched by this betrayal. But every moment of laughter, every kiss, every shared dream, felt poisoned now. And yet, I didn't hate him. Not exactly. What I felt was something worse. Indifference beginning to bloom. That's when I knew I was ready. Melissa called me 2 nights later. Her voice was low but firm. "Listen, sweetheart," she said. "They've committed fraud, forgery, wire fraud if the sale crossed state banks. This isn't just betrayal. It's a crime. I let that sink in." A crime. It sounded almost too heavy for the air in my kitchen. But she wasn't finished. And here's the kicker. Evelyn's company bought the property, but she transferred partial ownership to another name 2 weeks ago. A private LLC. Guess who the listed beneficiary is? I didn't answer. I didn't need to. "Daniel," she said softly. The phone felt heavy in my hand. So they weren't just selling my house. They were profiting off it together. My husband and his mother, partners in theft. I thanked Melissa, promised to keep everything quiet for now, and hung up. Then I sat in silence for a long time, just listening to the night hum around me. That silence felt different now. It wasn't suffocating, it was strategic. I started writing in a notebook. Names, dates, account numbers, every detail that could help build a case. It felt mechanical at first, but with each page my confidence grew. I wasn't the helpless woman crying on the floor anymore. I was a witness, a strategist, a survivor. The next morning, Evelyn called. Her voice was syrupy sweet. "Hi, dear. Just wanted to remind you about the appraisal tomorrow. Try to have the kitchen clean, okay?" I looked at the phone, smiling faintly. "I'll make sure everything's ready," I said softly. I hung up before she could hear the steel in my voice. Because everything was ready. Just not the way she thought. That evening, I drove to my parents' favorite cafe. I sat by the window sipping tea, watching the late autumn sun dip below the trees. That's when it hit me. I couldn't undo what they'd done, but I could control what happened next. I thought about my parents, their resilience, their quiet strength. They'd built their life from nothing. They'd survived harder times than this. My mother used to say, "We may not have much, but what's ours, we protect." Her words echoed in my chest. So that's what I'd do. Protect what was mine, even if it was just my truth. The next day, I met Melissa in person. We sat in her office, surrounded by files and photocopies. She looked at me over her glasses and said, "We can build a solid case. But we have to be careful. If they sense you know, they'll cover their tracks." I nodded. "I won't say a word," I told her. She smiled. "Good. Then we let them dig their own hole a little deeper." That phrase, dig their own hole, stuck with me. Because Evelyn had always believed she was untouchable. That arrogance would be her undoing. Over the next week, I played my part perfectly. I smiled when Evelyn called. I texted Daniel back when he said he missed me. I even baked her favorite lemon loaf when she came to check on progress. She walked through the house like she owned it. Technically, she did now, but I followed behind her, calm, polite, unreadable. When she complimented how well I was handling things, I just said, "I guess I've learned acceptance," and I watched her smile, thinking she'd won. Inside, I was smiling too, because while she thought she was closing a deal, I was opening a case. But beneath all the strategy, there was still grief, and I had to face it. One night, I sat alone in the living room, lights low, staring at the empty space on the wall where my parents' wedding photo used to hang. I'd packed it away, too afraid it would be taken next. I whispered to that empty space, "I'm doing this for you." And in that quiet moment, I swear I could almost feel my mother's presence. Soft, steady, unyielding. That gave me strength. By the end of that week, I had everything I needed. Copies of every fraudulent signature, bank records showing the transfers, text messages connecting Evelyn's company to Daniel's accounts, even a recording of Evelyn talking about getting the paperwork past her. She hadn't noticed I'd turned on my phone's voice memo during our last chat. It wasn't just revenge anymore. It was justice, and I wasn't just a victim. I was ready to fight. When I looked in the mirror that night, I didn't see the same woman who'd sobbed on the floor. I saw someone quieter, smarter, stronger. Someone who had learned that love without respect is just manipulation in disguise. I didn't know exactly how this would end. Whether I'd win in court, or lose everything and start over, but for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me. Because no matter what they took, they couldn't take me. The morning of the closing day felt too quiet. Even the air outside seemed to hold its breath. I woke early, dressed neatly, black slacks, white blouse, calm, professional. The woman in the mirror looked composed, but her eyes told the real story. A storm finally ready to break. Today, Evelyn and Daniel were supposed to sign the final documents that would officially transfer ownership of my parents' home. But I had other plans. At 9 a.m., I met Melissa at the county courthouse. She had a folder under her arm, thick with evidence. She didn't speak much, just gave me a small nod. "You ready?" she asked quietly. "As I'll ever be," I replied. We walked together down the marble hallway toward the clerk's office. Each step echoed like a countdown. I could almost hear my mother's voice in my head. "Walk with your head up, baby, even when they try to take everything from you." And I did. Evelyn was already there when we arrived. She looked radiant, like she'd dressed for victory. A silk scarf, gold jewelry, that smug smile that had haunted me for months. Daniel stood beside her, avoiding my eyes. "You made it," she said, pretending warmth. "I thought maybe you decided not to come. Probably for the best. These things can be emotionally messy." I smiled faintly. "Oh, I wouldn't miss it for the world," she blinked, a little thrown off by my calmness. Daniel fidgeted beside her. I could tell something in my demeanor unsettled him, the same way a predator senses when the prey stops running. The title agent began to go over the paperwork. Flipping through each page, Evelyn signed smoothly, her pen gliding over the lines. Daniel followed, though his hand shook slightly. When it came to me, I reached into my bag, pulled out a different folder, mine, and placed it flat on the table. "I won't be signing anything today," I said softly. Evelyn froze, mid-motion. "I'm sorry?" I looked directly at her, calm, deliberate. I said, I won't be signing anything. Because this sale is fraudulent. For a moment, no one spoke. The room went so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the overhead lights. Then Evelyn laughed, that condescending, dismissive laugh I'd come to despise. Oh, sweetheart, don't embarrass yourself. The paperwork's all legal. Melissa stepped forward and placed her folder beside mine. Actually, it isn't, she said. She flipped open the first page, a copy of the forged deed. Then another, the email trail. And then the bank transfer. Evelyn's face paled slightly. Daniel looked at me, his eyes wide. What is this? He whispered. This, Melissa said coolly, is evidence of forgery, real estate fraud, and financial conspiracy. Enough to get both of you indicted if you move forward today. I didn't look away. Not once. Not from Evelyn. Because this wasn't just about paperwork. This was about power. Mine, taken, lost, and reclaimed. Evelyn straightened her back, trying to recover. You have no proof that I... Melissa slid a printed transcript across the table. A voice memo. Evelyn's voice. Once it's in my company's name, she can't touch it. Daniel will get his share after closing. The silence that followed was brutal. Daniel's face went slack, horror flooding his expression. He turned toward his mother, whispering, You recorded that? Evelyn's lips parted, but no sound came out. I folded my hands on the table and said, You both underestimated me. You thought I'd cry and disappear. But you forgot something. I grew up in that house. My parents built it with their own hands. And I don't give up what's mine. The title agent cleared his throat nervously. Should I postpone the closing? Melissa nodded. Indefinitely. Evelyn tried to speak, but Daniel suddenly snapped. Mom, what did you do? You told me everything was handled. You said she'd never find out. She reached for him, but he pulled back like her touch burned. Don't you touch me, he hissed. It was the first time I'd ever seen him angry at her. Truly angry. And in that moment, I saw how deep her manipulation ran. She didn't just lie to me. She lied to her own son. Security eventually escorted them out. I didn't watch them go. I just sat there, hands folded, heart hammering quietly in my chest. Melissa exhaled. That went better than I expected, I smiled faintly. I told you, I wasn't here to fight. I was here to end it. And I had. But the story didn't end that morning. 2 days later, I received a call from the district attorney's office. They wanted to pursue charges, not just civil, but criminal. Forgery, fraud, conspiracy to defraud. Evelyn's company accounts were frozen. Daniel's name was under investigation. Everything they built on deceit was crumbling piece by piece. And I didn't have to lift a finger anymore. Truth was doing the work for me. When the news finally broke in the local paper, prominent real estate agent under fraud investigation, I felt something strange. Not joy, not revenge, just peace. Because the war was over, and I'd survived. A week later, Daniel showed up at my door. He looked thinner, older. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something hollow. I didn't know she went that far, he said quietly. She said it was legal, just a business deal. I swear I never meant to hurt you. I believed him. At least part of him. But belief doesn't erase betrayal. I said, You signed your name on the line that erased mine. That's all that matters. He nodded, tears in his eyes. Is there anything I can do? I thought about it. Then said softly, Learn from it. That's enough. And I closed the door. That was the last time I saw him. Evelyn eventually lost her license. Her company folded under investigation. As for me, I kept the house. The county restored the deed in my name after the fraud case was confirmed. The day the new papers arrived in the mail, I stood on the porch holding them in my hands. The sun was setting, that same warm, golden light my parents loved. I whispered, We're home again. And for the first time in months, I smiled. Later that evening, I walked through each room slowly. The creaking floors, the scent of old wood. It all felt alive again. Like the house itself had been waiting for me to come back. I paused in the living room, touching the spot on the wall where my parents' photo used to hang. Then I rehung it, centered, proud, unshaken. It was more than just a picture. It was a promise. That night, I made tea, opened the windows, and let the quiet fill the house. It wasn't the silence of grief anymore. It was peace. The kind of peace that comes when truth finally speaks louder than lies. And for the first time since all of this began, I finally felt something new. Not anger, not vengeance, but freedom. The days that followed were still, almost eerily so. For months, my life had been noise, arguments, legal calls, papers, sleepless nights. Now it was quiet. A different kind of quiet. I remember waking up that first Monday with sunlight slipping across the bedroom wall. No phone buzzing, no dread pressing on my chest, just air. Just peace. It took me a minute to realize. The fight was really over. The house was mine again. And so was my life. I started small. Repaired the old mailbox my father built with his hands. Repainted the kitchen walls the same pale yellow my mother once loved. Hung clean white curtains that fluttered when the afternoon breeze came in. It felt like breathing life back into something that had been asleep. Like the house itself had been waiting for me to forgive. It for what happened inside its walls. Every nail I hammered, every brushstroke I made, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Melissa stopped by one afternoon with iced coffee and a grin. "I almost didn't recognize this place," she said, setting down the drinks. "You've done wonders," I smiled. "It's amazing what healing looks like when it's made of paint and peace." We sat in the kitchen, sunlight pouring over the table. For a while, neither of us said much. It was enough just to exist in a space that didn't carry the weight of deceit anymore. She eventually asked, "Do you ever think about her? About Evelyn?" I looked out the window where the garden bloomed again. "Sometimes," I said honestly, "but not with hate anymore. Distance. Like remembering a storm that passed." Melissa nodded, a soft understanding in her eyes. "You earned that peace," she said. And I believed her. I started journaling again, too. Nothing fancy, just a few lines each night before bed. Sometimes it was gratitude. The garden bloomed today. Sometimes it was grief. I still can't believe he chose her side. And sometimes it was both. Healing, I learned, doesn't come in straight lines. Some days I felt lighter than air. Other days I caught myself staring at the old family photos, missing the people I thought I had, not the ones they truly were. But that's what growth looks like, remembering without reliving. One weekend, I drove out to the cemetery, brought fresh flowers for my parents' graves. It had been months since I'd visited, too much chaos before. I sat between their headstones, cross-legged on the grass, and whispered, "It's done now. The house is safe." A light breeze passed, and the leaves rustled softly like an answer. I told them about everything, about Evelyn's arrest, about Daniel's silence, about the garden that finally bloomed again. I laughed a little through tears. "You'd both scold me for letting it go that far, wouldn't you?" And in that moment, I swear I felt them there, not as ghosts, but as peace, like the love they left behind had finally found its way home again. Not long after, a letter arrived in my mailbox. No return address, just my name written in familiar handwriting. It was from Daniel. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't try to justify anything. He just wrote, "I'm sorry. You didn't deserve any of it. I hope one day you'll remember me as more than my mistakes. I'm trying to start over. I hope you do too." I folded the letter slowly, my eyes stinging. And for once, I didn't feel anger. Because forgiveness isn't about saying it's okay. It's about saying it's over. So I tucked the letter in a small box with my journal and old photos. Not as a wound, but as a reminder that I survived something meant to break me. As the months went by, I began hosting small dinners again. Friends, neighbors, laughter, the kind of warmth the house hadn't seen in years. I made my mother's recipes, told stories, played soft music on the old record player. Sometimes, when the evening light hit the kitchen just right, it felt like time folded in on itself. I was back to being that little girl helping her mother stir batter in the same bowl. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was stronger now. Scarred, maybe, but wiser too. The neighbors often stopped by, asking if I'd ever sell the place now that its value had risen. I always smiled and said, "Some things aren't for sale," and I meant it. Because this wasn't just a house. It was a story. Mine, my parents, every lesson carved into its walls. I think that's what Evelyn never understood. You can buy walls and floors, but you can't buy belonging. Sometimes at night I'd sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset fall behind the old oak tree. The same view my father used to admire. The same light my mother used to chase with her camera. The air felt different now. Softer, cleaner, honest. I could finally breathe without fear that someone was waiting to take something from me again. And that, to me, was the real justice. Melissa often joked, "You should write your story one day. People need to hear it." I laughed, saying, "Maybe, but it's not really a story about revenge. It's about reclaiming your truth, because that's what it was. Not just a legal victory, but a spiritual one." I didn't destroy Evelyn. I didn't humiliate Daniel. I just refused to let their lies define the rest of my life. And that, I realized, was enough. One evening, months later, I stood in the living room again, looking at my parents' photo on the wall. The light from the lamp washed it in gold. They were smiling, frozen in time, but alive in memory. I whispered, "We're okay now." And it wasn't about the house anymore. It was about me, the woman who had been broken, used, and nearly erased, now standing tall in the same place where she once felt small. That was the full circle. Later that night, I wrote one last journal entry. Peace doesn't always come when the war ends. Sometimes it comes quietly, long after the noise stops. When you can sit alone in silence and know you made it through. Then I closed the book, blew out the candle, and went to bed. The house creaked softly, familiar and safe. And as I drifted to sleep, I realized something simple, something powerful. I hadn't just won back a home. I'd won back myself. It's been a year now since everything happened. When I look back, I barely recognize the woman I used to be. The one who kept saying yes just to keep the peace. The one who thought family meant loyalty at any cost, even the cost of herself. Now I know better, because sometimes peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from standing up, even when your voice shakes. The house feels alive again. Every morning I open the curtains wide and let the sun pour in. I talk to the garden like it's an old friend, and somehow it listens. The flowers bloom brighter now, or maybe I just finally noticed them. It's funny how pain changes what your eyes choose to see. A year ago, I saw only loss and betrayal. Now I see lessons, painful ones, yes, but lessons all the same. I still think of Daniel sometimes. Not with anger anymore, but with a kind of gentle detachment. I hope he finds his peace too, wherever he is. Because carrying bitterness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to fall. And Evelyn, I don't think about her much at all. That's the true end of it, isn't it? When someone's name stops echoing inside you, there's something freeing about realizing you don't need revenge to heal. What you really need is truth. And once you have it, you stop chasing apologies, you stop rewriting the past, you stop waiting for closure from the people who broke you. You simply move on. And when you do, that's when life quietly opens its arms again. The biggest lesson I learned through all this is simple. But it changed everything. You can lose everything and still come home to yourself, because home isn't just a place. It's a feeling. The quiet certainty that you're safe in your own skin, that you don't need anyone's permission to take up space, to rebuild, to begin again. People sometimes message me after hearing my story and say, "I'm going through something like that too. I feel trapped. How did you do it?" And I always tell them this: you don't need to have it all figured out to start healing. You just need one brave moment, one deep breath, where you decide, this isn't where my story ends. The rest comes slowly, piece by piece. You cry, you stumble, you doubt, and then one day you look around and realize you made it through the storm you thought would drown you. That's the thing about storms. They strip away what's weak, what's false, what was never really yours. And when the sky finally clears, what's left is something unbreakable. You. I sit here tonight, telling you this story, not because I need sympathy, but because I want you to remember that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the quiet moments after the chaos. Sometimes it looks like making yourself a cup of tea in a house that finally feels like home again. And if you're listening right now, maybe you've been through something heavy. 2, I want you to hear this. You're not ruined. You're being rebuilt. Every scar you carry is proof that you survived, not that you failed. We all carry our own houses inside us, rooms filled with memories, doors that lead to old pain. But we also hold the keys. We can choose which doors to open and which ones to finally close. So tonight, as I finish this story, I want to leave you with one thought. Sometimes the people who break you are the very reason you learn how strong you really are. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns into the beginning of the best version of yourself. That's what happened to me. I lost everything I thought I needed and found everything I actually did. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels. And remember this: even when life takes your home, your peace, your trust, you can still choose to rebuild, stronger and softer than before, because the real home is not made of walls and bricks. It's made of courage, forgiveness, and the quiet decision to keep going.